Today we have a very special guest, someone I've been watching for a very long time, and it's crazy that he is sitting right in front of me today. Today we got Dr. Aaron Horschig. Did I get that right?
You got it.
Perfect. All right. Thank you again so much for coming on to the show today. How's your day going so far?
It's going pretty good so far. Thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, no worries. This is such an amazing opportunity because I've had so many squat, squat questions that I've had throughout my fitness career, and so many questions that a lot of them I actually found through doing research and seeing your YouTube videos. And then I noticed you started TikTok actually not that long ago. I think it was like about a year ago, right? Or 2 years ago, maybe.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, and I followed it and I learned so much more, not just about squats, but about, like Latin balances, and things like that. So I have so many questions for you today, but I know we have a limited time. So I just picked like the few that I think will help the most people and the few that I really want to ask you.
Let's do it.
So yeah, let's dive right into it. I want to start with the uneven lats part. And I noticed, one of the big problems that, people have, and I think some people actually don't notice, is when they're squatting and the bar is like lopsided. And I see this a lot at the gym. It might even happen for myself. I'm not too sure. But what is the reason for, this lopsided bar during a squat?
So there can be a couple different reasons why we set up with that uneven bar. One of the things that I find often in a lot of people is flexibility imbalances between the lats. Now I see this a lot in people, just lat stiffness in general, that do a lot of pulling motions, because the lats are those big powerful V-shaped muscles that lie on your backside of your body, and they help extend your arms. So when you're doing any type of pulling motion, you're getting extension from your shoulders. Now, the lats also internally rotate the shoulder. In order to get under the bar for a back squat, you have to externally rotate your shoulders to grab the barbell.
Right.
If you have an imbalance side to side in how flexible one side of your lats may be, it's going to be difficult to evenly grab the barbell. And sometimes these imbalances, they start small and they're not a big deal. As humans, we have small imbalances.
Right.
And especially if you're coming from a specific maybe sporting background where it's normal and needed to have differences in mobility. For example, a baseball player is going to have very different rotation abilities at his shoulders, or a golfer, things like that. And then you bring it into the weight room. If these imbalances are not kept in check and sort of kept at a minimum, it can lead to bigger problems when you start going heavier.
Right.
So that's why sometimes you'll see these small issues occur, and then we just don't even realize that they're big issues. We ignore them, and then all of a sudden you have a very wonky barbell, and then it starts affecting your performance. So I shared a video a couple weeks ago of a powerlifter that I was working with, and he had a pretty tilted barbell. Now you'll hear some people just sort of, make comments like, oh, it's not a big deal at all, don't worry about it. But when you actually get into the thick of training and heavy training with a lot of powerlifters and weightlifters, they'll let you know bigger imbalances limit how much load they can train with long term. So it affected his ability to actually get his training in the right way, get his recovery in, and make long-term progress. And with our testing, we found that he had a big imbalance in his lat flexibility. One side, one test that I usually do is you just sit by a wall and you put your hands two different positions. So palm down is internal rotation. Go up as high as you can and see how far you can touch towards the wall. Then do the same thing, but palms up. Now, when you go palms up, you're externally rotating your shoulder, so you're putting more of a stretch on the lats.
I see.
When he did that on his right side, he could get pretty high as well. But when he did that on his left side, he could barely get up past his eye level, showing that he had an imbalance in lat flexibility on his left side versus right. So we did a few mobility drills and then retested. Always test and retest to see if what you're doing is actually making the change that you're desiring. And then we found out it improved his lat flexibility, instantly got back under the bar, and he could now get into a better position and optimize his technique. And then from there, it's mobility drills and then stability to follow to make sure that you're locking in and enhancing this new position.
Wow, that's amazing. I think a lot of people overlook mobility and stability. Um, like I guess the average gym goer, they don't really look at it too much. But when you really get into that professional, your whole career is based on weightlifting. To be the best, I guess you really have to look into these things, right? And I think, for the average gym goer, if you are doing some stability work and some mobility work specifically to what you need, it can also really, really improve um, obviously your lifts and I guess if you don't have that in balance, you also have less risk for injury.
Yeah, I like to think of mobility and stability work like longevity
I see.
exercises. Um, if you think about it, if someone has an issue in stability side to side, in throughout their day, they may never notice it. But
Hmm.
when you're at the gym, a lot of the lifts that you're doing are with two arms, two
Yes.
legs. And if you have a big difference side to side, it's going to affect how your body is handling those loads. And the more weight that you're lifting, just the more increased risk there is of something not being handled optimally.
Right.
So stability drills are often done with one arm, one leg, because they expose problems in coordination and balance. And it
Mm,
supports the bigger movements. So think about it like this. I love showing people how to do a single leg touchdown squat.
hmm.
It's a very small squat. It doesn't have to be a pistol squat. Not everyone has the mobility to do a pistol squat. Um, and the desire to, right? Unless you're a top
Right.
level CrossFitter, like, yeah, pistol squat's a cool flex on TikTok, but is it actually going to do anything for you? But I think everyone has the ability to do a small partial single leg squat off like an 8 to 12-inch height box or plate, stack of plates. And in doing so, it shows you have adequate stability and balance on one leg. And in doing so, it supports your bigger lifts, your squats, your
Right.
deadlifts that are done on two legs.
Right.
So they go hand in hand, because if you only ever do your squats on two legs, only ever do your deadlifts on two legs, and you never challenge your body in single leg as well, I think sometimes it can increase the risk of these weak links increasing in their severity to the point at which you just open your body up for energy leaks, so inefficient movement, and increased risk of injury. That's what I deal with all day long, are athletes that come to me because they have had some sort of inefficiency within their
Right.
training and they've developed an injury because of it. And in doing so, not only is it my goal to help them get out of pain, but also equip them with the knowledge of how to train their body more optimally as they go forward in the future so that they don't come back to me. Because my goal is that I see you once and then I don't want to see you again in the future,
Right.
because I haven't just gotten you out of pain. Because there's a lot of practitioners that's what they do. They snap, crack, pop, put a dry needle in you, hot, cold pack, send you on your way. They make you feel better in the short term. I want to make sure that you get out of pain, but then also understand how to train your body optimally in the future. And I think that comes with having some stability or mobility work to supplement the other training that you're doing. And this is professional weightlifters and powerlifters
Hmm.
and your average gym goer. I think anyone who walks into the weight room should have this knowledge of how to properly train their body in the most optimal manner. It doesn't matter if your goal is just to get a little bit bigger, to look better in life, feel better in life, or if your goal is to, win a gold medal at the Olympics.
Right. Do you think that people who are doing, just like the dry needling and whatnot, are they just kind of trying to keep long-term clients and just trying to keep the people coming back, or?
I think there's two things. There's, first off, there are some people that literally, like, that is
Right.
their business model, where they will have someone come in, they will realign them, which
Hmm.
first off is a ridiculous statement. Snap, crack, pop their back, and then they'll be like, all right, well, let's get you on a monthly plan
Right.
where you come back for
Hmm.
maintenance. And I think that's a very bad way of going about helping someone, because it
100%.
creates reliance
Right.
on
Right.
that practitioner. I mean, there's a time and a place for manipulations. There's a time and a place for dry needling. Oftentimes, I always will explain it to people as it should be a tool to help open a window for then maybe other types of exercise or rehab to actually take hold. But if it's the only thing you're ever doing, and if it's something that you're doing that's creating reliance on that person, that's a bad way to go about it,
Yes.
because you're often not going to actually create long-term changes, and you're not empowering the individual to understand their body and what's going on.
Yeah.
They just keep on going and hurting themselves and having to come back to you, snap, crack, pop, come back, same thing,
Right.
rinse, wash, rinse, repeat kind of thing.
Right. So I want to talk a little bit more about, because you mentioned, we were talking about stability. So would you say that the lack of stability is the cause of a lot of like shoulder pain or elbow or just like joint pain in general?
Yeah. You want to look at the shoulder. It's literally the most mobile joint in the entire body. A
Right.
good way, an analogy of understanding the shoulders, it's almost like a golf ball sitting on a golf tee. At any given time, there's only a small percentage of the humerus bone, which is the end of your arm, actually in contact with the end of the socket, which is your scapula, your shoulder blade. So what that means is that there's not a lot of anatomy congruency, unlike other joints of your body, like the hip. The femur has a lot of contact within the actual acetabulum or the socket. So you rarely hear of someone dislocating their hip.
Right.
You hear a lot of times people
Yeah.
dislocate their shoulder, right? It's because there's a lot of inherent mobility to that joint. In that whole idea, there's a lot of need for stability within the shoulder in order to maintain optimal function, especially under load. So it can be not the only cause, because there's a lot of things that go into it, but it's one of the main causes for people that develop issues with technique and issues with stability or pain. There you go. Sorry, I had to let my dog out.
Oh, no worries.
So, yeah, does that make sense?
Yes, that does make sense. So it's just basically that there's not a lot of structure where it's like holding the joint in place. And so like when you're going really heavy to a point where, let's just say like someone's ego lifting, they're doing like a dumbbell press,
Yeah.
and they're going heavier than, their body can really handle. That's when like the joint, I guess, there obviously you get the shoulder dislocation, but shoulder pain, what is like the mechanics that happen when someone experiences shoulder pain?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, and what I mean, like shoulder dislocations are more prevalent. I don't want people to fear like, oh, their shoulder is
Right.
going to get dislocated when they're doing a dumbbell press. So think about it like this. You have that golf ball within the golf tee.
Yeah.
And what that means is that there's just more inherent need for all the muscles that surround the joint
I
to
see.
do their job to keep the golf ball on the golf tee. So
Gotcha.
you start doing single arm dumbbell presses, right? And it's much heavier. You're going for a really heavy set of 5 or something like that. Let's say your left shoulder just lacks a little stability. For whatever reason, you just haven't been doing enough stability work on that shoulder, and it's lacking a little bit. As you're going through the dumbbell press, there's more motion happening within that joint. So the golf ball is sliding around the golf tee more than it should. Now, I'm not saying it's sliding off, but there's more uncontrolled motion. Now, what that does is overload certain tissues. Okay.
Right.
So all of a sudden, certain parts of the shoulder are taking on more load more quickly, rather than sort of this balance pull between all the different muscles to keep the center of the golf ball on the golf tee. Now, every single tissue within your body has a certain set biological tipping point of load that it can tolerate. Exceed that load just a little bit, things are okay.
Right.
Start exceeding it to a high degree, you sort of kickstart this injury process. Okay, so you're pushing these dumbbells, and all of a sudden that left shoulder is just not working well. You're not stabilizing it well. Certain tissues, maybe the front side, they're just getting overloaded. They're doing so much work because the back side's not pulling its weight. All of a sudden, you're putting so much load on the front side that you put too much load past what those small tissues could tolerate. Injury process starts. Next day you wake up and you've got a really painful front side of the shoulder.
Now,
Does that make
now
sense?
this load you're talking about, it can obviously be increased over the course of time.
Yeah, so that's, again, we're looking at external mechanics and internal mechanics.
Okay.
So it's not just the weight you're lifting, 30 pounds versus 40 pounds, but also the forces on the joint internally And that's due to, I mean, we can get real nerdy with that, the forces of biomechanics and torques on the shoulder. So a dumbbell fly
Right.
is going to have increased load on the shoulder joint compared to a
Right.
close grip dumbbell press.
Right. So a thought just came up in my head. You see people doing dumbbell flies right to the side, and then I figured doing dumbbell flies a little bit lower is probably better for shoulder mechanics, right? Would you say?
It depends on the person.
Obviously.
Everyone's going to be a little bit different. And we need to understand basically what's optimal for the shoulder joint and health. That's why we teach technique. If you think about it like this, when someone is doing a bench press, barbell bench press, we ideally want to see those elbows tucked slightly underneath the barbell. We don't want those elbows
100%.
flared out to the side, right? And what's the reason for that? When you bring that barbell down to touch your chest with a barbell bench press, if those elbows are flared out to the side, you're moving into more internal rotation,
Right.
under load, and just because of the nature of the bench press, it's usually unfavorable for joint mechanics. Not saying people are going to get automatically injured if they flare their elbows, but it's usually from a performance standpoint inefficient for creating the most amount of weight lifted. And it just places the body into an unfavorable position, which could over time potentially increase risk of injury for some people. Everyone's again going to be different for how they tolerate loads and what is the best based on their injury history, their ability to tolerate loading, and also how they're progressing. So again, I said every tissue within your body has a certain set biological tipping point of load that it can tolerate. If someone is maybe progressing very, very slowly, but progressing over time, sometimes they can build that load tolerance to the point where they're not overstepping their bounds. That's going to be different than someone who takes too big of jumps.
Gotcha.
So even if someone maybe doesn't have the best technique, okay, let's talk about that elbow flare.
Okay.
It's maybe not the best technique. It's not the most efficient way to lift the barbell. If someone has that elbow flare, but they've actually done a very good job of load managing and sort of slowly stepping their bounds up, 5 pounds a week, slowly stepping up, their body to a point will get stronger within that poor technique and maybe never have an injury. But that same person that does that jump but goes too fast, they maybe add 20 pounds a week, they may overstep what their body's ability to build load tolerance is, and then they find an injury.
That leads me to my next question that I actually haven't written down, but I thought about this right now because I think this is a question that I've had for the longest time. Because I remember posting I remember learning this obviously in personal training school, and they told me that when you're doing your deadlifts, whatnot, you have to keep your back really, really straight. And so when I first started content creating, this is, the kind of stuff that I would post. And I started getting comments that people saying, hey, it's okay to round your back. It's okay to round the upper back a little bit. And then you get some people who are saying, it's okay to round the lower back a little bit. So from what you just explained, saying, like if you have really poor technique, but you build up slowly, it could be okay. But is rounding the back considered poor technique?
That's a great question. So we have to understand a few different factors with that.
Okay.
So first off, we have to understand moment versus movement. Okay, moment is high torque. Movement is the continuing of more and more flexion of the low back.
Right.
Now, when we look at the low back with deadlifts, we have to understand context. We have to also understand how research comes into it. So we have to bring a little bit of context within what science has shown us. A neutral or sort of straight spine is usually going to be ideal for most people. Because when you load the spine within a neutral posture, and again, neutral posture isn't one specific static position, but it's sort of a range.
Okay.
It's a little bit of a range. That's the way in which the body best distributes load across the entire vertebral joint and within the muscles. Okay, so just think it's the most balanced.
Gotcha.
And balance is good when we're talking about loading because we're not overloading any one specific tissue, right? Now, the second best would be seeing a little bit of curvature within the spine, but minimal movement. So high moment.
I see what you mean.
less movement. Now, if you look at some really good deadlifters out there, they will have a slight bit of flexion,
Right.
usually more in the thoracic spine,
Right.
but they sort of lock their spine down and try to limit movement. Okay, so they'll have high moments, they'll have flexion torques because they're picking a bar up from the front side, but they'll try to limit flexion movement. Now, you'll get some people on TikTok who have first read a research article and they don't understand the context yet. And they'll go, oh, but this research article showed that there was 15 degrees of movement. Okay, you pick up 400 pounds and try to keep your low back from moving at all. We're talking about limiting motion. Yes, there's going to be some finite motion that will occur at the spine no matter what. But it's limiting that motion and trying to maintain stiffness that is the key. Because what research shows us is that the more motion and the more load, the increased risk there is of injury. Because you're throwing off that balance and you're creating stress distributions that can increase risk of overloading certain parts of the joint. Okay? Now, I talked about how even if you had poor technique, but you maybe progressed slowly enough, you may you may not run into an injury, right? And that was the original question. So let's talk about someone who just has a horrible deadlift technique. They have that cat back. As soon as they start deadlifting, their back rounds. If they slowly progressed, added 2 pounds a week over a year, right? Could they get stronger with that crappy technique? Yeah. They're going to get stronger.
Right.
And they may not run into an injury because they're going so slow.
Right.
You cannot say for certain that they'll not find an injury because they very well could. Because anyone who's trying to advocate that that's okay, you would have to know what is your individual set capacity point so that you don't overload those tissues. You don't know that, right? You can't say person A has their capacity is at this level, person B's capacity is at that level. You're just crap shooting. You're hoping you don't pass it.
Right.
Because there's increased risk anytime you're pushing more weight with poor technique. Not saying it's going to happen, but there's increased risk. Now, on the other hand, if that person used better technique, they're more efficiently moving in a way that's balancing those loads across the entire body, they're going to be able to lift more load and more volume and recover from it quickly. Meaning over the long term, they're going to be able to add more weight to their deadlift because they're using more efficient technique to start from. So if you want to be the one person to prove everyone else wrong and say, hey, I bet you I can lift really heavy with this crappy technique, sure, go at it. Be your N of one experiment. But in the end, what are you doing but just proving a point that you are that one person that can maybe tolerate it? So I see these people nowadays that think that like pushing a heavy Jefferson curl is okay. And they'll say it's the best way to strengthen your spine. We call this playing with the dragon's tail. Sure, you may be that one person that can slowly get a little bit stronger and round your back under load, and maybe you won't find injury, and I hope you don't because I don't want you to have an injury. But a lot of people are going to run into issues because they're going too fast, they're inefficiently moving and combining movement and load. And across the board, we find that most people will not be able to tolerate that, and they will find an increased risk of injury because of that. And again, our goal when we go into the weight room is to enhance capacity, to get stronger for the gym and in life.
Right.
And we use our knowledge of the gym and combine it with what science shows us. And in wisdom of training a lot of people and seeing within our own selves and the people that we train, I have come to the conclusion, along with many other coaches, that we want to be able to be as efficient as possible. And when we combine flexion and movement, or flexion movement and a lot of load, that's not going to be a combination for long-term success. So any of these people nowadays, and you'll see them, they're on social media, they speak a big game as far as, oh, it's okay to let your back round.
Yeah.
No worries, you'll be fine. You're not going to be hearing them lifting big weights and having a healthy back in the long term.
Right. Oh man, that answers so many of my questions. So many of my questions.
I'm glad.
Yeah, because I see this a lot on not just on social media, but like walking around the gym, friends lifting,
Hmm.
even myself. Every time I'm about to go down my deadlift, I'm like, is it okay to round my back? Um, so now I know. Just to clarify, though, basically a slight round uh, is okay if I progress, I guess, a little bit slower, along with not having flexion in the spine as I'm pulling.
Yeah, sort of lock it in place and then pull, move about the hips.
Gotcha.
Try to limit spinal motion because there's some elite powerlifters that have a slight bit of flexion within their body when they're pulling.
Right.
And for example, like an Atlas stone, you can't pull an Atlas stone with a neutral spine. So strongmen, they have to wrap their spine
Right.
around the
Yes.
stone,
Yeah.
right? But a lot of that motion is actually still coming from the hips until the very last moment at which the stone is sort of over their hips, then they sort of unlock their spine.
So I think the next question a lot of people would have is if I say I'm always deadlifting with a little bit of a rounding in the back,
Yeah.
will I start, in my daily life, will I start having this roundness in the back because I'm putting so much load in that position?
Oh, like what would it lead to, like sort of poor
Yeah.
posture? Potentially. I mean, you're strengthening your body within that position.
Right.
My question would be, what else are you doing throughout your training?
I see.
Because the one thing that we do as physical therapists, we especially working with certain athletes, is we try to undo what training does to them. So if an athlete is constantly in that sort of hunched over position and they get really strong there, well, what other exercises are they doing that's maybe helping them get a little bit more
I
extension?
see.
Because you can't squat very well if you're in that hunched over position. So are they doing any type of extension based work or work within a neutral spine to strengthen their body within that sort of more ideal posture?
Gotcha. Okay.
So I would say, yeah, if that's all you did, yeah, for sure. Because your body's going to strengthen itself and become solidified within certain postures that you put yourself into. That's why you see people that have like had maybe they've worked in a mine a
Okay.
long time,
Right.
right? They're just constantly hunched over and working in a mine, or people that have that desk job,
Yeah.
and their body just sort of stiffens themselves into that position. So the body can adapt to the postures that you put it within.
I see. Okay. That definitely answers a lot because I think posture is one of those things that um, people are always trying to focus on.
Hmm.
Do you know Coach Eugene Tao? I don't know if you've seen him before.
I think I've heard of the name, but I don't know of. I don't
Right.
think I've seen any of his content.
Right, because I came across one of his videos before,
Okay.
and I think he's made the reputation or the impression that he's kind of a more of a trustworthy kind of influencer on the social media platform. So I came across one of his videos. It was talking about posture, and he
Okay.
was saying that there's no such thing as a good posture. He says if anyone tells you that, like this is a good posture, they don't know what they're actually talking about. And that really got me thinking because throughout my whole life, I've been told you got to have a tall chest, you got to have your,
Hmm.
keep your chin up, don't slouch. And so I wasn't sure what Eugene was really trying to refer to, but it almost seems like the way he was saying it is that any type of posture is totally fine for your body. So I was just wondering what your take was on that.
Well, without having to really see what he said, it's hard to say with 100% certainty
Right.
what he was trying to say. But I'll give you my thoughts on just that topic.
Yes.
I think there's sort of two approaches. First off, I think people have been told for a long time of like posture is one specific position.
Mhm.
We stand tall and then that's good posture. So we have to maintain that all the time. And that's ridiculous because, you need to be able to move throughout the day, right? And you need to not be in one static, stiff position the whole time.
Right.
So static posture is not like one specific, that's not how we move. In saying that, posture is fluid. We're always moving into different postures. But posture definitely matters. And it
Right.
matters based on context. If I'm relaxing on the couch, doesn't matter if my shoulders are a little, rounded, my back's a little
Mm-hmm.
rounded, under low load, I'm watching TV. No, I'm completely fine. Does posture matter when you deadlift? It sure as hell does. Does
Mm,
posture matter when you are picking up a load in your garage? If it's a heavy box, it definitely does. Context matters.
right.
Posture definitely matters because posture is your movement quality. And posture dictates how load is being handled by the body. Okay? And posture also matters as far as throughout the day, the different positions that you're getting into. You can't say posture doesn't matter and then also say technique matters when lifting, because
I see.
posture and technique are synonymous.
Hmm.
We then just understand the context of what we're doing throughout the day. If I were to be someone that walks a lot throughout the day, okay, I'm constantly moving, but I'm constantly with my shoulders forward like this. Just put yourself into a bad, shoulder forward position and stay like that for 20 minutes. Tell me how you feel after that. You're not going to feel good,
Right.
right? Posture matters. Technique matters.
Right.
Now you have to sort of understand the context of things and what we're talking about. In that posture is something that you're constantly moving in and out of. But I think people like to make black and white statements like that nowadays,
Hmm.
to sort of get a lot of social media hype and maybe create some
Right.
buzz.
Yeah.
But yet they maybe don't understand the complexity at which they're speaking about.
Hmm.
So again, not to say anything about what he was saying because I haven't
Right.
seen his video on it, but I'll say posture definitely matters, but we have to have some of that talk about the nuance behind what does that mean. Do I want you to be rigid throughout the day? You're bending over to pick up a shoe, you need to squat and make sure that everything's tight. Obviously that's ridiculous.
Right.
But does posture matter? Maybe it's going to be individualized as well. If I have someone that comes to me with back pain,
Right.
what I look for is specific movements, postures, and loads that trigger their pain. For example, I had someone come to me the other day, and their pain came out when they rounded their back.
I see.
They had no pain in a neutral posture. They had no pain when they overextended their back. But every time they bent over, they had pain. For that person, if I want to help them get out of pain, I need to teach them how to sort of maintain a neutral spinal posture a little bit more throughout their day in the short term to help wind their pain down. So every time they want to pick something off the ground, I would teach them to kneel or to sort of hinge to keep their spine from bending.
Gotcha.
Now, again, I tell them, I don't want you to fear spinal flexion because eventually you need to be able to round your back a little bit if you're going to pick something off the ground. But right now, that's a trigger for your pain if you round your back.
Hmm.
So a flexion posture is not a good idea for you right now in the context of your back pain.
Right.
When you're sitting for that person, they needed a lumbar roll underneath their low back because it allowed them to sit for as long as they wanted without pain. But if they sat in a chair and sort of relaxed and let their back round, their pain came out. So for that person, posture definitely mattered because it was a trigger for their back. So we can't make a blanket statement that posture definitely doesn't matter. And in saying that, it's a very junior approach to understanding how the body works to say posture doesn't matter. Posture definitely matters.
Well, it's crazy how the more I do kind of these podcasts and the more I learn from experts like yourself, is that I can't think of things from one point of view or just like think of things on the surface level because there's so many, factors and variables that come into play. And um, I think when we're going on social media and we're scrolling through TikTok and whatnot, there's always people that are claiming, this one thing, and then you take this one thing and then you connect it to a whole bunch of other things in your life. And I think it's just so crazy how complex things actually are, and how deep you have to look to really actually get the right answer.
Yeah.
So we just hit the 40-minute mark. I was just wondering if you're okay on time still.
Yeah, I've got time for a couple more minutes.
Okay, perfect. So let me see which question I want to ask. I have like three more. I have three more here. Let's talk about where to hold the barbell for a bench press. I think the video I saw, I think you made this, and it was, correct me if I'm wrong, it was like the shoulder to shoulder length, and then you place it into the middle, and then that's where you grab the bar.
Yeah. So first off, there's a little bit of it depends.
Okay.
I just did a video recently with Julius Maddox. And people, if they just go to my YouTube, they can see it's bench press tutorial, the ultimate bench press tutorial, I think is the name. And in that context, we're not necessarily talking about competitive bench press in the sport of powerlifting. We're just talking about what feels best for you. You like going to the gym,
100%.
you want to bench press. In that case, one of Julius, who, for those out there that don't know who Julius is, he is the strongest raw bench presser in the world. So his best bench press is, I think, 792 pounds or 796 pounds. Wow. But his idea was like, if you get down into a push-up position and you sort of go shoulder width, you maybe go an inch wider, an inch more narrow, whatever feels the strongest, that's usually a good position to start at for the bench press. Now, that other video that you're referring to is with Jen Thompson. And Jen Thompson is an 11-time world powerlifting champion. Literally, pound for pound, one of the strongest women in history. And what we were referring to there is more of a competitive bench press. And we were taking clavicle to clavicle length and timesing it by 2. And then that's going to be sort of your preferred best bench press for if you're trying to lift as much as possible. And for her, it put her sort of a little bit more wider grip. And we're referring to a research article that came out, I think it was like maybe later 90s, early 2000s, where they found that usually between a 1.5 to 2 times clavicle length width for your grip was found to be usually the highest poundage lifted within the bench press. So basically, find the end of your clavicle at your shoulder and the end of your clavicle at your other shoulder. Find that distance. Say it's 32 centimeters. Times it by 2, 64 centimeters. Now find 64 centimeters width on the bench press. Put a little chalk mark. That's usually going to be where you may find the best leverages for lifting the most amount of weight possible.
Okay. Gotcha. I'm going to jump into my next question really quickly because I know we're running out of time, and I really want to ask this question. So, what shoes to wear when lifting? Because I know you talk about, like the...
I talk about shoes a lot, like it's going to depend, first off, on what gym you're at and what type of lifting you like to do. I'll say this. First and foremost, the shoes we do not want to lift in are going to be narrow shoes. And that's going to be a lot of Nikes, Adidas, Converse. People don't realize that the shoes you wear have a direct effect on your feet, and your feet stability have a direct connection to how well you're moving and the weights, how well you can perform. Narrow shoes limit your body's ability to optimally stabilize your feet. What happens is that a lot of people, and this is for centuries, we wear shoes that are very narrow at the toe box. And this is because fashion standards have dictated that a narrow tipped shoe looks good. That's what high fashion is. And that's been for centuries. There's literally studies showing that in the 14th century, people of nobility and higher socioeconomic status wore narrow tipped shoes. So that's why Nikes are made very narrow. It looks good. That's what sells. And what we don't realize is that it smashes your toes together and limits your ability to stabilize your foot. When you have your toes spread out, you can have a wider base of support. Your foot can be a better root to the ground. And the more stable you are, the better the technique you can have on top is going to be. Like a pyramid, the pyramids have withstood thousands of years in construction. They haven't blown over because they have a very wide base. The same thing for your physical body is if you have a wider base, you're going to be able to withstand a lot more forces and have better technique over the top. A lot of people don't realize that knee cave and things like that are directly related often to your foot stability. So when it comes to lifting, we usually have sort of 2 general type of shoes. You have sort of flat sole shoes, and then you have heeled shoes, often used by weightlifters and CrossFitters. As far as a flat sole shoe, you want to be able to get out of, again, shoes that have narrow tips. So and how you do this, you literally just pull the insole out, stand on top of it, and see where your feet go. Oftentimes, if you pull out a pair of Nike Frees or a Nike Air Max, you stand on top of the insole, your toes are going to go over the ins, meaning that in order for your foot to fit within that shoe, the toes are going to be smashed together. So there's many shoes that are nowadays becoming a little bit more popular within the gym. And if you don't have money for them, literally go barefoot. Find a gym that allows you to go barefoot or lift in socks. You're going to be better off allowing your toes to
Right.
spread out that way. So it's not like I'm saying, hey, spend a lot of money. Finding a pair of shoes that allow your toes to spread out is going to be key. As far as different options, Vivo Barefoot, Zero, Barefoot Athletics has a really good shoe made for powerlifters. If someone wants a sort of on the lower end of pricey, Splay Athletics is going to look more like a Converse shoe, but it's going to have a very wide toe box. As far as weightlifting shoes, every single weightlifting shoe on the market with a raised heel is too narrow for your shoes.
Right.
But
Okay.
that will change this November.
Oh, is that right? How do you
Yeah.
know?
I can't say too much yet, but
Okay.
that will change this November.
Okay, and so I know flat feet is also a very common problem. I have flat feet, and it's been a very big problem for me. And
Yeah.
would you say that like having my toes clumped together is also bad for that?
I have seen a lot of people come to me that are like, yeah, I got flat feet. And I look at their feet and I'm like, no, you don't have flat feet. You just have low arches that are poorly stabilized.
I see.
It's not about the height of the arch, but the function of the arch that you do have. A lot of people who have flat feet just have low arches and poor control of their arch. The big toe has a direct connection with the muscles that support the arch. So you allow those toes to spread out and you're going to have better control of the arch you do have.
Okay, and I noticed you made a video with toe spreaders once, and those are beneficial, right? If you
Very beneficial for a lot of people. I wear toe spreaders every single day. But
really,
yeah, and because it's trying to undo what narrow shoes have done to
I
me my
see.
whole life. Yeah.
Where can I get toe spreaders?
Correcttoes.com. Check them out.
Correctos.com.
They're the best ones out there. And
Okay.
on their website, they have a lot of articles for people to learn from and read about the negative effects of shoes and why it's so beneficial to find wide toe box shoes.
Okay, gotcha. I'm gonna take a look
Yep.
at those because I think I'm definitely gonna grab one of those myself.
Yeah.
So we just hit the 47-minute mark. I don't want to keep you for too long. I know you got a busy day ahead of you. But do you have any last general advice you would want to give the audience here today?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just never stop learning. Really dive into learning from people who you trust, that are there to help you get better in the gym and live a healthy lifestyle. There's a lot of great people putting out excellent information in the world today, and never take a day to not try to learn something new from them.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr.
You're
Aaron.
welcome.
So we'll wrap up the podcast here. Thank you again for taking the time out of your day to come onto the show.
You're welcome, man.
I learned so much today, and I think this episode is going to help a lot of people. So I'll edit it. I'll
I'm
send it
glad.
over to you, and
Sounds
then
good.
we'll see where we go from